It was late in the evening, and the sky had turned a deep shade of purple, streaked with faint orange as the sun disappeared behind the distant hills. Ethan, a man in his late 40s with weathered skin and calloused hands, had just finished his daily chores on the ranch. He had spent the entire day checking fences, feeding the animals, and repairing a broken water trough. His old horse, Dusty, a brown and white gelding with a white star on his forehead, had been his companion for many years. Ethan trusted him more than any person he knew. Dusty had a calm nature and a sharp sense of danger, which Ethan had often relied on during long rides across the ranch's wide lands. That evening, Ethan noticed something unusual. Dusty was restless. The horse usually followed Ethan obediently to the barn, eating his feed and waiting for the next day's tasks, but tonight he refused to enter the stable. He pawed at the ground and let out short, anxious whinnies. Ethan frowned, scratching his head. "What's gotten into you, old boy?" he asked softly, trying to calm Dusty. The horse neighed again, louder this time, and then moved toward the canyon that lay on the edge of the ranch. Ethan paused. That part of the land was rocky and steep, not a place he went often after sunset. Still, something about Dusty's insistence told him he should follow. He grabbed his lantern and his rifle just in case, and walked carefully through the dusty trail that led toward the canyon. Each step made small stones tumble down the slope. Dusty stopped several times, looking back at Ethan and stamping his hooves as if urging him to hurry. As they moved deeper into the canyon, the wind whispered through the rocks, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and earth. Ethan noticed something shimmering in the dim light, near the dry creek bed that cut through the canyon. Dusty's ears twitched, and he neighed once more, pawing the ground urgently. Ethan's heart began to beat faster. There, lying on the ground, he saw a young woman. She was barely conscious. Her long black hair tangled and wet with dirt, and blood stained the side of her dress. Her breathing was uneven and her hands were shaking. Ethan approached slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Hey there, miss. You're safe now. Don't worry." He crouched beside her, carefully placing his hand on her shoulder. She flinched but did not try to move away. He could see the fear in her dark eyes. The wound on her side was serious, but she was alive. Ethan's mind raced. He had never seen such a situation before. He had helped animals and neighbors, but never a stranger in such danger. Dusty nuzzled her gently, letting out a soft, comforting whinny. The horse's presence seemed to give her a small measure of comfort. She looked at the animal with a mixture of awe and fear, and for a brief moment Ethan noticed her lips form a small, almost invisible smile. He took a deep breath. "All right, old boy, looks like we need to get her somewhere safe." He carefully lifted her, supporting her weight as best as he could, and Dusty stayed close, walking beside him as they slowly made their way back to the ranch. The journey was long and difficult. Every step on the rocky trail was careful, and Ethan had to stop several times to let the woman rest. Her name was a mystery to him. She had not spoken. She only whispered a few words in a language he did not understand, but her tone was full of pain and fear. Ethan focused on keeping her calm. "We're almost there," he said softly. "Just a little more and you'll be safe." Dusty's hooves kicked up small puffs of dust as he led the way, occasionally stopping to look back, ensuring she was still with them. By the time they reached Ethan's cabin, night had fully fallen. The small wooden house looked warm and inviting under the soft glow of the lanterns Ethan had lit. He carried her inside carefully, laying her on a thick blanket he had spread on the floor. He could feel her body trembling and her breathing was shallow. Dusty stayed near the door, his head lowered as if guarding her. Ethan tore strips from an old shirt and boiled water over the stove. He cleaned her wound as best as he could, careful not to hurt her further. She winced but remained still, placing her trust in him despite the language barrier. Her hands were cold and her fingers clutched at the blanket, but she did not move away. Ethan worked quietly, knowing that she needed calm and care more than anything else. Hours passed and she finally drifted into a light sleep. Ethan watched her carefully, feeling a strange mix of relief and concern. Who was she? How had she ended up in the canyon, injured and alone? He did not know, and for now questions had to wait. She needed rest, warmth, and safety, and he would provide all of it. Dusty lay beside the blanket, keeping his eye on her even as he slowly closed his own eyes. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the cabin window, casting a golden glow on the rough wooden floor. The young woman stirred, opening her eyes slowly. She looked around, clearly confused and frightened. Ethan stayed calm, speaking softly. "You're safe here. Nothing will hurt you." She looked at Dusty, who nickered gently and seemed to relax slightly. She whispered her name for the first time. "Tala," she said softly, the word unfamiliar but full of meaning. Ethan repeated it quietly, committing it to memory. "Tala, all right. You're safe, Tala." Tala's eyes scanned the cabin, taking in every detail, the stove, the blankets, the small table, and of course, Dusty. She did not speak much, but her gaze told Ethan that she was slowly understanding that she was in a place of safety. He offered her water and a little food, and she accepted it hesitantly. She moved slowly, still weak from her injuries, but there was a determination in her eyes that Ethan respected. She was not a person who would give up easily. Over the next few days, Ethan and Tala settled into a quiet routine. She began to heal, the wound on her side slowly closing and her strength returning. She spoke little, mostly in her own language, but Ethan listened carefully, learning her gestures and expressions. Dusty became her constant companion, standing close to her whenever she moved. It was as if the horse knew she had been through a great ordeal and was determined to protect her. Ethan often thought about what had brought her to the canyon, and he realized that she must have faced terrible danger before meeting Dusty. He had lived in these lands for many years, and knew that conflict between settlers and native tribes was not uncommon, but he had never personally seen it up close. He did not pry too much, understanding that trust and patience were more important than questions. Tala's healing required peace and kindness, and Ethan was determined to give her both. Dusty's behavior continued to amaze Ethan. The horse seemed to sense Tala's moods, stepping closer when she appeared afraid and backing away when she was calm. There was a connection forming between them, one that Ethan could not fully explain. It was as if Dusty had chosen to help her, and in doing so had also brought her into Ethan's life. The man could feel that something profound had begun, something that would change the quiet rhythm of his days and the life of the young woman who had appeared in his canyon, wounded and afraid. By the end of the first week, Tala was able to move around the cabin more freely. She helped with small tasks like fetching water from the nearby stream and feeding Dusty. Though she remained cautious, there was a growing trust between her and Ethan. He taught her small words in English, and she taught him small words in her language. It was slow, but it was progress. They learned to communicate in simple ways, understanding each other's gestures, expressions, and intentions. Ethan could not help but feel a sense of wonder at the turn of events. Just a few days ago, he had been finishing chores alone on his ranch, unaware of the story that was about to unfold. And now, because of Dusty's alertness and loyalty, a young woman named Tala was safe and healing under his care. The world had shifted slightly, bringing together a man, a woman, and a horse in a bond that none of them could have predicted. As the sun set on another quiet evening, Ethan sat outside the cabin, watching Tala and Dusty by the stable. Tala smiled faintly as Dusty nudged her gently, and Ethan felt a warmth in his heart. He knew that the days ahead would bring challenges, questions, and perhaps dangers, but he also knew that this moment, the first time he had truly understood the meaning of courage, trust and kindness would remain with him forever. And so, the night fell, quiet and peaceful, with Dusty standing watch, Tala resting, and Ethan reflecting on the strange and wonderful way that life sometimes brought people together when they least expected it. The canyon, once a place of danger and fear, had become the beginning of something new, something that would change their lives forever. The morning sun poured through the small cabin window, casting golden light across the worn wooden floor. Tala stirred on the blanket, slowly opening her eyes and looking around. Her dark eyes scanned every corner of the room, a mixture of curiosity and fear visible on her face. Ethan sat nearby, sipping a cup of coffee, careful not to startle her. He had learned over the past few days that Tala needed space and calmness more than anything else. Her body had healed slightly, but her spirit still carried the weight of the danger she had escaped. Dusty, ever watchful, stood close to her side. The horse's presence seemed to reassure her. She reached out slowly and stroked his nose, and Dusty lowered his head, letting her touch him. The gentle connection between them brought a small, relieved smile to her face. Ethan watched quietly, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He realized that healing was not just about tending to wounds, but also about providing trust, comfort, and companionship. Ethan prepared a small breakfast and offered it to her. Tala accepted it cautiously, picking up each piece of bread with care, eating slowly as if afraid that something might be taken from her. Her hands were steadier now and she managed a few small bites. Ethan watched, careful not to rush her. "You'll need your strength," he said softly. "We've got a lot of work ahead, and you have to get better." She nodded silently, still hesitant to speak, but her eyes reflected gratitude. Over the next few days, Tala began to explore the cabin and the small surrounding ranch area under Ethan's supervision. She moved slowly at first, cautious and careful with every step, as if afraid the ground itself might be dangerous. Ethan let her move at her own pace, never pushing her, always nearby in case she needed help. Dusty followed her everywhere, stepping lightly and ensuring she did not stumble. The bond between the horse and the young woman grew stronger with each passing day. Ethan attempted to teach Tala some basic English words. He would hold objects and repeat their names slowly: water, bread, fire, horse. She repeated after him carefully, sometimes stumbling over the sounds, but she tried again until she got it right. Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of pride. It was slow but progress. In return, Tala would teach Ethan some of her words in Apache, showing him simple gestures to help him understand. Communication remained limited, but with patience they began to understand one another. As she healed physically, it became clear that Tala carried memories that weighed heavily on her. At night she would wake suddenly, her eyes wide and staring into the darkness. She would whisper words in her language, trembling slightly, and Ethan could sense the fear that lingered even after the danger had passed. He did not ask her to speak of it. Instead, he sat nearby, listening quietly, offering a hand to hold or a comforting word when she seemed most afraid. Sometimes Dusty would nuzzle her gently, letting her know she was safe. One evening, Ethan noticed that Tala had begun to show small signs of trust beyond mere survival. She helped with small chores, fetching water from the stream, or feeding Dusty with oats from a bag. She smiled faintly when Dusty approached or when Ethan offered her a warm meal. Though she still did not speak much, her actions told Ethan that she was slowly learning to trust both him and the life around her. Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Just a few days ago, he had been unaware of her presence in the canyon, and now a bond had formed between them that neither could have expected. He could see in Tala's eyes the beginnings of hope and the courage she had carried despite her injuries and fear. He realized that the young woman's survival had not been mere chance, but that Dusty's instincts had guided him to her. Without the horse's warning, he might have arrived too late. One afternoon, while Tala sat near the stable, Dusty grazing quietly beside her, Ethan noticed tracks near the edge of the property. Fresh horse and boot prints had been pressed into the soft earth. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Someone had been searching for her, and it was only a matter of time before they returned. He knelt down and studied the tracks carefully. They led toward the canyon but ended near the edge of his land. Ethan's mind raced. He had a sense of unease, knowing that the danger that had injured Tala had not disappeared. When he mentioned it to Tala, she froze. Her dark eyes widened and her hands trembled. She whispered a few words in her language, and Ethan could see that memories of past dangers haunted her. She finally spoke more clearly than before, describing the events that had brought her to the canyon. Her village had been attacked by men who sought revenge and land. Her family had been separated and she had run for her life, eventually collapsing near the canyon. Her voice was soft but full of fear, and Ethan listened quietly, letting her speak without interruption. He felt a surge of anger as he heard her story. He had always lived quietly, aware of the tensions between settlers and native tribes, but he had never personally seen the consequences. The cruelty she had endured was painful, and he vowed silently to protect her. Yet he also knew that protecting her would be dangerous. Ethan had lived a life of caution, avoiding conflicts that could threaten him, but now he understood that some dangers could not be ignored. In the days that followed, Ethan took extra precautions. He reinforced the cabin doors and fences, ensuring that Tala would have a safe place to hide. He kept a close watch on the surrounding land, riding out on Dusty to survey the area for any signs of intruders. Dusty, ever alert, seemed to understand the tension in the air. The horse would neigh at distant sounds, pawing the ground and moving closer to Tala whenever Ethan was away. Ethan realized that Dusty had become more than a companion. He was a protector, a bridge of trust between the wounded young woman and the world outside. Tala began to regain some of her strength, and with it, a sense of determination. She no longer flinched at every sound, and she began to take small steps toward independence. She would carry water from the stream on her own, feed Dusty without assistance, and help Ethan with chores. Her eyes carried a spark that had been absent when she first arrived. Though she remained cautious, it was clear that her spirit was slowly returning. Ethan found himself learning from her as well. He realized that courage was not measured by physical strength alone, but by the ability to keep moving forward despite fear and uncertainty. Tala's resilience impressed him deeply. Her quiet determination, her careful observations, and her growing trust in him and Dusty reminded him of the strength of the human spirit. The bond between them deepened further through small, everyday interactions. Ethan would teach Tala to cook simple meals, showing her how to knead dough and bake bread in the small oven. She would watch closely, following his movements, occasionally laughing softly when the dough stuck to her fingers. Dusty would stand nearby, occasionally nudging her hand as if offering encouragement. These moments, simple and quiet, built a sense of safety and trust that grew stronger each day. By the end of the week, Tala was able to move around more freely, her steps confident but careful. She began speaking more, repeating words she had learned in English and showing Ethan the words in her own language. Communication became easier, even if imperfect. Ethan noticed that she smiled more often, and her eyes no longer held the constant fear that had haunted her when she first arrived. There was still caution, still memories of danger, but they were slowly being replaced by trust and hope. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Ethan, Tala, and Dusty sat together outside the cabin. The sky was painted with orange and purple streaks, the air calm and still. Tala stroked Dusty's mane gently, whispering softly in her language, and Ethan smiled. He realized that the days ahead would be full of challenges, that danger might still return, but he also knew that for now, in this moment, they were safe. They had each other. Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude for Dusty, the horse who had led him to Tala when she needed help most. Without him, she might not have survived. He looked at her and saw the beginnings of a new life, one where she could heal not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. He promised himself silently that he would do everything he could to keep her safe, to help her find peace after the horrors she had endured. That night, as the stars appeared in the dark sky and the wind whispered softly through the trees, Ethan knew that their story was just beginning. Tala had come into his life by chance, yet their meeting felt destined. Dusty stood nearby, his ears flicking toward the night sounds, ever watchful. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the quiet strength that surrounded them. He knew that the days ahead would be difficult, that they would face dangers and fears, but he also knew that together, they could face whatever came next. And so, as the cabin rested quietly under the moonlight, Tala slept peacefully for the first time in many nights. Ethan watched over her and Dusty stood guard. The beginning of trust, healing, and friendship had been formed, and the story of a horse, a young woman, and a kind rancher was only just unfolding. Days passed quietly at the small ranch, but Ethan could sense a change in Tala. She was healing, her steps were steadier, and her eyes had grown brighter. Yet there was still something in her gaze, a shadow of fear, a memory she carried silently. She often stared toward the distant hills and the canyon where Ethan had first found her, as if the past was still waiting there. He noticed it in the way her hands would tremble slightly when a gust of wind rattled the cabin door, or when Dusty whinnied at a distant sound. Ethan realized that Tala's body had healed, but her spirit was still burdened by what she had endured. One evening, while the orange sun dipped low behind the hills, Tala spoke more clearly than she ever had before. She whispered, "They came for me." Her voice was soft, almost broken, but full of fear. Ethan sat beside her, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. "Who came?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then said a few words in her language. Ethan didn't understand them, but her tone was enough. He realized that she had survived something terrible, something more than an accident or a simple misfortune. Finally, with patience and care, Tala began to tell her story. She spoke in short, broken phrases, sometimes in English, sometimes in her own language, and Ethan listened closely, trying to understand each meaning. Her village had been attacked. Men on horseback, armed and cruel, had stormed through, burning homes and taking what they wanted. Families were separated, and those who resisted were injured or worse. Tala had run for her life, fleeing across the hills until she had collapsed near the canyon. Her wound had been inflicted during the escape, but it had been enough to threaten her life. Ethan's jaw tightened as he listened. He had lived his life quietly, avoiding conflict, but hearing the story made something inside him stir. He felt anger for the cruelty she had endured, but also a sense of responsibility. She had come into his care by chance, yet he could not ignore the danger that still lurked in the hills. He reached out and placed a hand on hers, simple and reassuring. "You're safe here," he said softly. "I promise you, nothing will harm you while I'm around." Tala looked at him, her dark eyes filled with both fear and gratitude. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in safety. The next few days were spent reinforcing that safety. Ethan strengthened the cabin's doors and windows, making sure there were no weak points. He cleared the area around the house so that he could see anyone approaching from a distance. Dusty remained vigilant, standing guard near the gate and responding to every sound with a careful whinny. The horse had become more than a companion. He was a protector, understanding the tension in the air and helping to guide Tala toward calmness. Tala, meanwhile, began to adjust to the rhythms of life at the ranch. She helped Ethan with simple chores, moving slowly at first but gaining confidence each day. She learned to feed Dusty, carry water from the stream, and help with small repairs around the cabin. With each task, her strength grew and her smile became more frequent. She still spoke little, but Ethan could see in her eyes the beginnings of trust and determination. Despite the fear that lingered, she was slowly reclaiming her life. One morning, Ethan noticed fresh tracks in the dirt near the edge of the property. Horse and boot prints pressed into the soft earth, leading from the canyon toward the cabin. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Someone had been looking for her. He studied the tracks carefully, noting the direction and spacing. They were recent. The realization filled him with both concern and resolve. He could not allow anyone to hurt her again. He shared his concern with Tala, who froze at the news. Her eyes widened and her hands trembled. She whispered a few words in her language, and Ethan realized that the fear she had carried for so long was still very real. She finally explained that the men who had attacked her village were still searching, that they wanted to find her and bring her back, or worse. Ethan listened quietly, his mind already planning. He knew he would need to protect her, even if it meant risking his own safety. That night, Ethan sat by the fire thinking. He looked at Tala, who sat across from him quietly, Dusty lying nearby with his head resting on the ground. She had grown stronger, but the threat outside had not vanished. Ethan realized that her safety depended not just on healing, but on courage and vigilance. He could see that Dusty's calm presence helped her, but he knew that a plan was needed if danger approached. The following days were tense but productive. Ethan taught Tala to move quietly, to notice sounds in the wind, and to understand when something was out of place. They reinforced the cabin further, setting simple traps to alert them if anyone approached. Dusty's instincts were invaluable. The horse would paw the ground, snort, and nuzzle Tala if danger was near. Each night, Ethan and Tala would review their surroundings, talking quietly and learning to read the signs of the land together. During this time, Tala began to open up more about her life before the attack. She spoke of her family, of her father, a respected leader in her village, and of her younger siblings. She spoke of the traditions, the songs, and the stories she loved. Though her English was limited, Ethan listened carefully, learning not just the words but the meaning behind them. He realized that Tala's courage had always been there, but fear and circumstance had kept it buried. Now with safety, it was beginning to shine. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ethan noticed a change in Tala. She was standing near the stable, brushing Dusty's coat with care and speaking softly to him. There was a quiet strength in her movements, a calm determination that had not been there before. She smiled faintly when Dusty nudged her hand, and Ethan felt a deep sense of pride. He realized that despite everything she had endured, she was learning to trust again, to live again. Yet, even in moments of calm, the threat lingered. The tracks in the dirt reminded Ethan that they were not alone. He knew the men who had attacked Tala's village might return, and he resolved that he would face them if necessary. He did not speak of it yet, knowing that Tala needed peace more than worry. But he prepared quietly, readying weapons, planning escape routes, and teaching Tala to recognize signs of danger. Dusty remained a constant ally, his instincts sharp and his loyalty unwavering. As the days turned into weeks, Tala grew more comfortable in the cabin and on the ranch. She began to take joy in small things. The warmth of the sun on her face, the taste of fresh bread, the sound of Dusty's hooves on the dirt path. She would laugh softly when Ethan showed her how to perform simple tasks, and he would laugh in return. The bond between them deepened, built not only on care and protection, but on respect and understanding. Ethan also began to learn from Tala. He saw courage and wisdom in her eyes, qualities that he had admired but rarely seen in such clarity. She had survived unimaginable danger, yet she remained kind, patient, and aware. Her resilience inspired him, reminding him that strength could come from compassion and determination as much as from force. One night, as the wind rustled through the trees and Dusty lay quietly near the cabin, Tala spoke softly. "I remember," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, understanding that she was beginning to confront the memories that had haunted her. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe now. We'll face it together." She nodded, resting her head on her hands, and for the first time, he saw a measure of peace in her expression. Ethan knew that the coming days would be critical. The men who had hunted her might return, and he would need to be ready. But he also knew that Tala's courage had grown, that Dusty's loyalty was unwavering, and that together they could face whatever came next. The past was not forgotten, but it could be met with strength and care. As the night deepened and the stars appeared in the sky, Ethan felt a quiet determination. He would protect Tala, guide her, and help her reclaim her life. Dusty, ever watchful, stood nearby, his ears twitching at every sound. Tala slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, the tension of the day easing from her body. Ethan watched her quietly, knowing that the story of their lives was still unfolding. The canyon and the hills, once a place of fear and danger, had become a place of refuge and hope. Together they had begun to build a life of trust, courage, and care. Ethan understood that the world outside might still hold threats, but within the small circle of the cabin, the ranch, and the loyal horse, Tala had found safety, and Ethan had found purpose. And so, as the moon rose high over the hills and the wind whispered softly through the trees, the ranch stood quiet, a small haven for a young woman, a man, and a horse. The journey was far from over, but the bond they had formed was strong, and the courage they carried would guide them through whatever dangers remained. The next few days passed with an uneasy calm. Ethan, Tala, and Dusty maintained their quiet routines, but there was tension beneath the surface. Ethan had checked the perimeter of the ranch repeatedly, noting the tracks that appeared closer to the cabin. He could sense that the men who had attacked Tala's village might soon return. He taught Tala to listen for sounds in the wind, to notice unusual movement, and to trust Dusty's instincts. The horse had become more than a companion. He was a guardian, alerting them whenever something seemed out of place. One late afternoon, Dusty began to paw the ground anxiously near the gate. His ears flicked toward the distant hills, and he neighed sharply. Ethan froze, recognizing the warning immediately. He looked at Tala, who was standing near the stable, brushing Dusty's mane. Her dark eyes widened and her body tensed. "They're here," she whispered in broken English, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, moving quickly to gather what he would need. Dusty whinnied again, pawing the ground, eager to alert them further. Ethan quickly guided Tala toward the cellar, a small space under the cabin where she could hide safely. He placed blankets around the entrance to muffle any sound and instructed her to stay low and quiet. Dusty followed them, standing near the cellar with his head lowered, ready to respond to any threat. Ethan grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, his heart beating steadily but fiercely determined. He knew the men approaching were dangerous, but he was prepared to defend the woman he had promised to protect. Through the fading light, Ethan saw 4 riders emerging from the distant dust of the canyon. Their movements were purposeful, and the glint of weapons in their hands told him they were searching for someone. He crouched low, using the cover of the rocks and fence posts, watching as they approached. Dusty snorted, pawing at the ground and shifting his weight as if to warn the men he was not alone. Ethan raised his hand slightly, calming the horse but keeping alert. As the riders neared the cabin, they called out, demanding to know if Ethan had seen a wounded Apache woman. Their voices were rough and harsh, filled with anger and threat. Ethan stepped out slowly, keeping his rifle at his side, but ready. "I ain't seen anyone," he said calmly. His voice carried over the dust, steady and firm. The leader of the group sneered, trying to push past him, moving toward the cabin's door. Ethan planted himself firmly in front, his gaze unwavering. "I said no one's here," he repeated, his voice stronger this time. The standoff grew tense. The men exchanged words, their tone threatening, but Ethan remained calm, relying on the knowledge of the land and the instinct that had guided him all these years. Dusty whinnied suddenly, stepping forward, his presence alone startling the riders. The horse kicked up dust with his hooves, forcing the men's horses to rear and stumble slightly. The leader cursed under his breath, realizing that the horse was more than just an animal. It was a warning. Seizing the moment, Ethan raised his rifle into the air and fired a warning shot. The loud report echoed through the canyon, startling birds into flight and sending a flurry of dust into the air. The men hesitated, glancing at one another. Ethan's voice rang out again, clear and commanding. "Get off my land or you'll regret it." The combination of the rifle, Dusty's aggressive stance, and Ethan's firm presence was enough. The men grumbled, muttering threats, but slowly turned their horses and retreated, disappearing into the dust and the fading light. Ethan lowered his rifle and exhaled, feeling the tension in his body release slightly. He waited a few moments, listening, ensuring the riders had truly gone. Dusty remained alert, ears flicking and nostrils flaring, but his stance softened. Ethan moved quickly back to the cellar, checking on Tala. She emerged slowly, trembling but unharmed. Her eyes filled with gratitude and relief. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan smiled faintly. "We did it together," he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Dusty nudged her gently, as if agreeing with Ethan's words. The next hours were spent in quiet recovery. Tala sat near the fire, drinking warm water and shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Ethan stayed close, speaking softly, calming her fears. Dusty lay nearby, keeping a watchful eye at the door and windows. The danger had passed, but the memory of the men still lingered in Tala's mind. She spoke little, but Ethan could see her mind processing everything that had happened. Over the following days, Ethan remained vigilant. He rode Dusty around the property, checking for any signs of returning intruders. Tala helped as much as she could, fetching water, feeding Dusty, and observing the land with keen attention. Slowly, she regained her confidence, learning to trust not just Ethan and Dusty, but also the safety of the cabin and ranch. Each day, the bond between the three of them grew stronger. They had faced fear together and survived, and that shared experience built trust and mutual respect. One morning, while Ethan was repairing the fence, Tala approached him with a small bundle of wildflowers she had picked near the stream. She handed them to him silently, a faint smile on her face. Ethan took them, touched by the simple gesture. It was a reminder that despite the dangers they had faced, life could still offer moments of beauty and hope. Dusty nuzzled Tala gently, sensing her calmness, and Ethan realized that the little victories, the small acts of kindness, the gestures of trust, were what truly mattered in their journey together. As the days passed, Ethan also noticed that Tala began to talk more. She repeated English words with increasing confidence and shared small stories about her past. She spoke of her family, the songs of her village, and the land she loved. Though her memories of the attack were still painful, she began to process them with support and safety around her. Ethan listened quietly, learning not just her words, but her emotions, her courage, and her resilience. Ethan knew that more challenges could come. The men who had attacked her might return, and the surrounding lands were unpredictable and often dangerous. But he also knew that Tala had changed. She was no longer the frightened girl who had collapsed in the canyon. She was learning to be strong, resourceful, and aware of her surroundings. She had courage now, built slowly through safety, trust, and guidance. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills and the sky turned orange and purple, Ethan, Tala, and Dusty sat together outside the cabin. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. Tala stroked Dusty's mane, whispering softly in her language, while Ethan watched quietly. The bond between them was evident, not just between human and horse, but between humans learning to trust and support one another through fear and danger. Ethan reflected on how Dusty had been the first to sense the danger and lead him to Tala. Without the horse, she might not have survived, and without the trust that had grown between them, they might not have faced the returning threat with calm and courage. Each of them played a part, the horse, the young woman, and the rancher, and together, they had created a shield of safety that no one could easily break. That night, after the sky had darkened and stars appeared overhead, Ethan checked the cabin once more before settling by the fire. Tala rested nearby, Dusty lying close, ears twitching at every sound. Ethan felt a quiet pride. They had survived the first real test of danger together, and their bond had grown stronger because of it. He knew the journey ahead would be difficult, but he also knew they were prepared. They had learned to face fear with calm, to trust in one another, and to act with courage when it was needed most. As Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, he thought about the lessons of the past few days. Strength could come from trust, courage from connection, and hope from simple acts of care and protection. Dusty had reminded them of instinct. Tala had reminded them of resilience, and Ethan had learned the value of vigilance combined with patience. Together they had faced danger and survived, creating a sanctuary in the canyon where fear had once ruled. And so the ranch settled into quiet once more. The cabin, the stable, and the surrounding hills became a place of healing, vigilance, and trust. Tala had learned to stand tall in the face of fear. Ethan had learned the depth of responsibility and care, and Dusty had proven that loyalty and instinct could change the course of lives. The danger had arrived, but it had been met and overcome, and the bond formed through that challenge would guide them through whatever came next, building courage and hope for the days ahead. The days following the encounter with the riders passed quietly, but Ethan knew it was a calm before the storm. Tala had grown stronger, and her movements were more confident. She no longer flinched at every sound or shadow, and her dark eyes now held a spark of hope and determination. Dusty stayed close to her as if sensing the calm that had finally settled over the ranch. Ethan watched them, heart swelling with pride. They had survived fear and danger together, and the bond between the three of them had grown unbreakable. One morning, as sunlight bathed the cabin and the surrounding hills in gold, a distant sound caught Ethan's attention, hooves pounding softly against the dirt trail, voices calling in the distance. He immediately recognized the rhythm of approaching riders. He moved quickly to alert Tala, who had been tending to Dusty in the stable. "They're coming," he said quietly. Her eyes widened, but there was no panic. She had grown stronger, braver, and she looked at him with trust that he could handle whatever came next. Ethan guided her to the cellar again, helping her settle among the blankets. "Stay down and quiet," he instructed. Dusty nudged her gently, reassuring her while Ethan stepped outside, rifle in hand, ready to face the approaching threat. The riders appeared through the dust, their faces grim, their horses galloping steadily. Ethan recognized them immediately, the same men who had attacked Tala's village, returning to complete what they had begun. He crouched low, keeping his stance calm and firm. Dusty pawed the ground, snorting at the riders, while Ethan's heart beat steadily, trained by years of experience on the ranch. As the riders drew closer, Ethan called out firmly, "I said leave my land." The leader sneered, raising his hand as if to push past him. But Ethan stood his ground. Dusty whinnied sharply, stepping forward aggressively, kicking up dirt and forcing the men to hesitate. Ethan raised his rifle, aiming to fire a warning shot into the air. The loud crack echoed through the canyon, startling birds into flight and the horses into unease. The riders froze, unsure whether to advance. Ethan's voice rang out clearly, firm and commanding. "I warned you. Get off my land or face the consequences." The men exchanged nervous glances, realizing that Ethan and Dusty were not ordinary defenders. Dusty pawed the ground again, stomping as if warning them further. The men grumbled, shouting threats, but the combination of Ethan's calm determination and the horse's protective stance was too much. Slowly they began to retreat, kicking up dust as they vanished toward the canyon from where they had come. Ethan lowered his rifle, watching carefully until the dust settled and the men were gone. He turned and moved quickly back to the cabin, checking on Tala. She stepped out of the cellar cautiously, trembling slightly but unharmed. "You saved me again," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. Ethan smiled faintly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We did it together, he said gently. Dusty nudged her gently as if agreeing with Ethan's words, and she allowed herself to smile for the first time since the danger had returned. The next few days were peaceful. Ethan kept watch over the property, riding Dusty along the perimeter, making sure the area was secure. Tala helped with small chores and tasks, her confidence growing each day. She fed Dusty, collected water, and moved through the cabin and yard with ease. Slowly, the fear that had once dominated her movements and expressions began to fade. She had survived terror, she had faced danger, and she had emerged stronger and wiser. Then one morning, as sunlight glimmered across the hills, Ethan noticed a group of riders approaching in the distance. But these were not the hostile men from before. They were Apache riders, their presence calm and respectful. Among them was an older man riding slowly toward the cabin. Tala's eyes widened, recognition and relief flooding her face. She ran forward, tears streaming down her cheeks as she embraced the man. It was her father. He held her tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude and relief, tears glistening in his eyes. Ethan watched quietly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had kept Tala safe, and now her family had come to reclaim her. Her father looked up at him, his voice trembling with emotion. You saved my daughter's life. No words can express our gratitude. Ethan shook his head humbly, gesturing toward Dusty. It wasn't just me, he said softly. This horse found her first, and he guided me to her. We all did what we could. Tala turned back to Ethan, her hands gripping his with warmth and sincerity. You gave me life, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. I will never forget it. Ethan smiled, feeling the weight of the journey they had shared. The fear, the danger, and the uncertainty were all behind them now. The bond they had formed through trust, courage, and care had changed their lives forever. Over the next days, Tala reunited with her family. Ethan helped facilitate their stay at the ranch, providing food, water, and shelter. The Apache riders and Ethan worked together, exchanging knowledge of the land and ways to protect it. Tala's father spoke with Ethan often, praising his courage and kindness. Few men would risk their lives for someone they didn't know, he said. Ethan nodded, humbled. She needed help. That's all that mattered. Dusty remained a constant presence, standing near Tala, watching over her and her family. The horse's loyalty and instincts had been invaluable throughout their ordeal. Ethan often looked at Dusty with gratitude, understanding that without the horse's sharp senses and timely alerts, Tala might not have survived. Dusty had become more than a horse. He was a guardian, a friend, and a symbol of the bond between humans and animals forged through care and trust. Tala gradually resumed the routines she had once known, helping her family and learning to live freely again. She shared stories with Ethan about her village, her childhood, and the traditions she loved. She spoke with laughter and joy, her voice carrying a lightness that had been absent during the days of fear. Ethan listened quietly, feeling honored to witness her healing and happiness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, Tala, her father, Ethan, and Dusty gathered near the cabin. They sat quietly, watching the hills and canyon that had been the scene of so much fear and hope. Tala looked at Ethan and smiled. You saved me and you gave me courage, she said softly. Ethan placed a hand on Dusty's mane, smiling back. It wasn't just me, he said. You had courage too, and this horse reminded us both how to be brave. Tala's father approached Ethan, placing a hand on his shoulder. You have shown more than bravery, he said. You have shown kindness, respect, and care. You will always be remembered in our village. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest, knowing that his actions had made a lasting impact. He had acted out of simple humanity, yet the consequences had created connections, trust, and hope that would endure for years to come. The following weeks were filled with quiet joy. Tala and her family prepared to return to their village, but they promised to maintain contact with Ethan. Dusty remained near them, nuzzling Tala gently as she stroked his mane one last time before the journey. Ethan felt a mixture of pride and melancholy, knowing that their time together had been brief but transformative. He had learned that courage could come from unexpected places, that trust could heal wounds, and that even small acts of care could create bonds strong enough to overcome fear and danger. As Tala and her family departed, Ethan watched them fade into the distance, Dusty standing faithfully by his side. He felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been difficult, filled with fear, uncertainty, and challenge, yet it had also brought connection, understanding, and hope. The canyon, once a place of danger, had become a place of refuge, trust, and healing. That night, Ethan sat outside the cabin, Dusty grazing nearby. The sky was filled with stars and the air was calm. He reflected on the journey, remembering the fear in Tala's eyes when he first found her, the tense standoff with the riders, and the quiet moments of trust and care that had grown between them. Every challenge had brought them closer, taught them resilience, and strengthened their bond. Ethan whispered softly to Dusty, who nuzzled his hand in return. "We did good, old boy," he said. "We saved her, and we made a difference." Dusty whinnied softly as if agreeing, and Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude for the horse who had guided him to Tala and helped him protect her. In the days that followed, life at the ranch returned to a gentle rhythm. Ethan continued his work. Dusty remained vigilant and loyal, and the memory of Tala's presence lingered as a reminder of courage, resilience, and the power of trust. The story of a horse, a young woman, and a kind rancher spread quietly through the nearby towns, a tale of bravery, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Ethan knew that the world could still hold dangers, but he also knew that courage, trust, and kindness could overcome fear. He had witnessed it firsthand. Tala had survived, healed, and reclaimed her life. Dusty had protected and guided them both. And Ethan had learned the true meaning of bravery, not in fighting, but in caring, protecting, and trusting. As the sun rose the next morning, Ethan looked out over the hills and canyon, feeling a sense of completion and hope. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had led to healing, courage, and connection. He knew that life would continue with its trials and joys, but he also knew that their story had created a lasting mark, a